Have you ever felt it? That tension in the air when you're the only one left, on shift. The hum of the lights overhead. The silence just a little too loud. And the creeping thought that maybe, just maybe, you're not as alone as you think. Tonight we are sharing Night Shift Stories, a collection of true and terrifying encounters from those who work while the rest of the world sleeps. Security guards, factory workers, overtime workers, people like you and me, who've seen things after dark that defy explanation. Please welcome tonight's guest, Girl in the Dark, and be sure to check out her channel. Now, let's begin. This happened not long after I started working the night shift. Back then I was new to the industry, wide-eyed, eager to prove myself, willing to put in the long hours that came with the job. I landed a position at a small design office in the city. Our workspace was located on the 8th floor of a rather old building, the kind with yellowed wallpaper in the hallways, buzzing lights, and elevators that creaked like old bones when they moved. The entire 8th floor had been converted into an office space, and our company had the whole thing to itself. To enter, you took the elevator up, stepped into a small landing area, and then opened a frosted glass door that led into the office. My desk sat all the way at the back, straight ahead from the entrance, facing a blank wall, and on nights like the one I'm about to tell you about, I was completely alone. Now, the building itself already had a reputation. It stood in a district that had once been known as an execution ground, more specifically, a kubikiriba, a place where people were beheaded. It was the kind of history people whispered about after a few drinks. Most laughed it off, of course, but in our industry, where late nights were commonplace, a lot of people had stories. Whispers of strange sights and sounds, shadowy figures glimpsed through glass, drafts of cold air in rooms with no windows. At first, I didn't pay it much attention. Old buildings creak, elevators break down. You hear things when you're overtired, right? At least that's what I told myself. That night, I'd stayed late again. It wasn't unusual. In this line of work, 2 a.m. was just, unfortunately, another hour on the clock. The office was silent. The kind of silence that only exists in old, empty buildings. The only light came from the glow of my monitor. I had music playing softly through my earphones, but even that started to feel a bit too loud. I was chipping away at a design draft, eyes half-focused when I heard it. A metallic sound, faint but distinct, behind me. Clank, clank. At first I thought it was my imagination, but it came again. Clank, clank. I turned around slowly and looked towards the entrance. Through the frosted glass door I could make out movement. The elevator doors were opening and closing, over and over, mechanical, unnatural. Clank, clank. The sound echoed through the hallway, bouncing off the walls like footsteps. There was no reason for anyone to be coming up this late. Not at this hour. Not here. The elevator doors continued to clank rhythmically. I watched the shape of the elevator doors through the frosted glass, opening and closing like they were trying to breathe in and out. In and out. Eventually I stood up. I wasn't even sure why. Maybe just instinct. Something told me to go take a look. I walked to the entrance, hand hovering over the door handle, and then silence. The moment I opened the office door, the elevator stopped. The doors slid shut, slowly, softly, and they remained closed. I stepped into the hallway, heart thudding, and I walked over to the panel and I pressed the open button. The elevator responded immediately. The doors opened, revealing an empty cabin. Nothing inside. No bags, no documents, no coat caught in the frame, just the cold air of a steel box that felt like it had been waiting for something or someone. I stared into that empty space for a while, and then I eventually turned back. I returned to my desk and sat down, and I resumed working. But the silence around me felt heavier now, like something had followed me back in. And in the end, the longer I worked at that company, the more stories I began to hear. Co-workers who'd worked late, talking about footsteps in the hallway, the elevator coming up on its own. Some even claimed that they had dreams. Bad dreams. Always the same, of a man in a dark silhouette standing just behind the frosted glass, watching them silently. Some said that they felt cold air near doors. Others said that they heard knocking. I'd laugh, back then. Joke about it, of course, like everybody else did. But after that night, I started noticing it too. How the shadows seemed longer after midnight. How the lights sometimes flickered near the elevator. How, even when I was sure that I was alone, I didn't feel alone. Looking back now, I wonder if I should have taken that night a little more seriously. The elevator shouldn't have been moving. And if it was a glitch, some kind of malfunction, why did it stop the moment I stepped out? Why did it feel like something was trying to get in? I still don't know what I heard that night. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was a visitor from another time, from the execution grounds, down below, still wandering the halls. Someone was maybe looking for a way out.
This eerie tale comes from my husband. It's something that happened when he was working part-time at a private psychiatric hospital in Akita Prefecture last year. As many of you may know, psychiatric hospitals usually have two types of wards, an open ward and a closed ward. The open ward allows patients to move around freely, but the closed ward requires keys or access cards to enter and exit. The patients there often have severe mental health issues and may find it difficult to live normal lives. Most of the patients in the closed ward came from rural areas of Akita, and the lingering effects of decades of inbreeding were apparent. Because of this, it was rare for patients to move to the open ward or be discharged. Families would often beg the doctors to allow their loved ones to stay in the closed ward for life. And sadly, that was often the reality for many patients. Now, there was a particular room in the middle of the closed ward, a private room for female patients, where something strange happened. Every time a patient was placed in that room, they would mysteriously pass away within 2 months. Word had spread about this oddity, and after hearing the rumor, my husband couldn't shake the uneasy feeling whenever he passed by that door. He worked part-time there for a few months, and over time he started to recognize more of the patients, some of whom he had admitted under his own diagnosis. Then, in the fall, a woman with advanced dementia, prone to wandering, was admitted to that same private room. Even though the room had such a dark reputation, my husband tried not to think much of it and shrugged off the superstition. The next day, an older nurse told him something unsettling. She said, "Well, it's happening again. Right beside the door of her room, the orderlies always lay out her futon. When we asked her why she didn't sleep in the middle of the room, she replied, there's someone already sleeping there. It's the same thing that the previous patient said. It's creepy, don't you think? My husband didn't dwell on it too much, but thought it was strange. He went on with his duties, doing rounds to check on the patients. There were no signs of anyone being in critical condition, so he wrapped things up and headed home. A week later, the woman passed away from pneumonia, likely due to an internal infection. But the nurses reported that she had been constantly talking about a woman, lying in the middle of the room and being loud, right before she died. The thing that makes this story so chilling is how the strange and unnerving events seem to follow the patients, as if there was something sinister about that particular room, something that couldn't be explained, no matter how hard anyone tried. I wonder if it all had something to do with the woman that final patient spoke of.
This is a story told to me by a friend. He's never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. In fact, he was always the guy to scoff at horror stories, dismissing them as mere tricks of the mind. But what happened to him at his workplace one night made him question everything. He worked at a fairly large metal processing factory in our hometown. It was a demanding job, especially during periods when workers often had to stay deep into the night, and the last ones to leave bore the responsibility of shutting everything down, turning off the machines, checking the warehouse lights, making sure the place was secure. That particular night had been exceptionally hectic. By the time my friend and his co-worker, a fellow new hire, had finished their tasks, it was already past 2 a.m. The senior employees had all left, trusting them to handle the final checks. Splitting the duties, my friend took charge of ensuring all the machinery was powered down, while his colleague went to switch off the warehouse lights. It should have been routine, simple, but when his co-worker returned, there was something off about him. He looked pale, shaken, his eyes darting nervously over his shoulder. "What's wrong?" my friend asked. His co-worker swallowed hard before replying. "I turned off the lights in the warehouse, but when I stepped outside, they came back on. By themselves. The warehouse was old, the lighting system outdated. Maybe it was just a faulty switch, a loose connection. My friend's co-worker had followed procedure exactly. He had shut off the lights, locked the door behind him and moved on. The warehouse had multiple security layers, 4 heavy-duty metal shutters, each one designed to keep a storage area sealed, tight. He had methodically closed each one, making sure that everything was in order, and yet, when he locked the 4th and final door, he noticed something chilling. The first section, the one he had definitely turned off, was on again, glowing with light. At first he tried to rationalize it. He thought, like my friend did, maybe the old switch was faulty. Maybe it bounced back. So gathering his nerve, he stepped back through the doors one by one until he reached the first section. This time he was extra careful. He flipped the switch, watching carefully as the lights flickered off. He stood there for several moments, ensuring they stayed that way. Only then did he make his way back, securing each layer once again, and just as he locked the final door, the first section's lights turned back on again. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. The air in the warehouse suddenly felt thick, oppressive. This wasn't just a mechanical error. This was something else, something watching. He was certain of it. Panic rising in his chest, he bolted back to the factory floor where my friend was waiting. My friend rolled his eyes, frustrated that his co-worker had gotten so worked up over what was probably just little more than a wiring issue. "It's just the lights, you haven't checked properly." But seeing how shaken the guy was, he didn't push it. After all, they had both been working non-stop. They were both exhausted, and frankly, neither of them wanted to stay a second longer than necessary. So, they decided to leave. And as they walked towards the office, about 20 meters from the factory floor, a sharp, metallic sound cut through the silence. The unmistakable clang of machine engaging. Both men froze mid-step, their hearts hammered in their chests as they exchanged uneasy glances. "You heard that right?" My friend's voice was barely above a whisper. His co-worker nodded, his face ashen. "Yeah, I definitely heard that." They stood there waiting, listening. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. No other sounds followed. It was probably just one of the machines settling, my friend reasoned. Or a misfire from one of the automated systems. Neither of them wanted to turn back. They didn't want to see. So they kept walking, and then they heard the same clang of something mechanical. This time twice, louder, closer. Like something was moving back there. They didn't want to investigate. They ran. The next day, they cautiously brought up what happened with one of their senior colleagues. The older man sighed, rubbing his temples as if this was something he had long since stopped caring about. This factory has a bit of a history. Turns out workers had been pushed to their limits for years. Accidents were frequent, fatalities even more so. There were rumors of a man who hanged himself in the warehouse. Another had fallen into a machine and been crushed beyond recognition. And the strangest part, no one ever talked about it. Probably because it was a black company. The senior worker told them about a sealed-off warehouse, a section no one dared enter, about the old, faded paper talisman, slapped on certain walls as if someone or something had tried to keep whatever lurked there contained. No one questioned the odd happenings anymore. They had simply learned to live with them. My friend still works there to this day, but no matter how busy things get, he refuses to work the night shift. I work at a convenience store in Japan. It's a fairly standard job, long hours, repetitive tasks, an endless stream of customers. Some are pleasant, others are indifferent. And then there are the ones who make you wonder how they function in society. These kinds of customers seem to come out when I work the night shift. One of our regulars falls into this category. This man comes in almost every day, buying something small, drinks, snacks, smokes, but never once in all the time I've worked there has he been polite. From the moment he steps through the door, his attitude makes it clear that he considers us workers beneath him. When he pays, he never hands over the money properly. Instead, he just throws it onto the counter as if disgusted by the idea of direct interaction. If a new cashier is working the register and takes even a second longer than he deems acceptable, he makes an exaggerated click of his tongue before muttering, "So slow." If the fried food he wants isn't available, he doesn't just accept it and move on like a normal person. No, he makes sure to let us know exactly how much we've failed him. "You should have had it ready. Do your job properly." Every exchange with him is the same. No greetings, no acknowledgement of common courtesy. Just impatience, arrogance, and a complete lack of basic respect. Even when I ask, "Would you like your bento heated up?" he never responds right away. I always have to ask a second time, and only then does he give me the barest nod, like answering is a burden. And when I hand him his change, he snatches it away without a word and just storms off. Nobody likes him. But we're employees, and he's a paying customer, so we serve him like we would anybody else. He came in tonight, and things were different. Tonight he wasn't alone. He walked in with a woman, a well-dressed, polite-looking young lady. His girlfriend, I assumed. I watched them browse the aisles together, and for a moment he almost seemed normal, not so miserable, just like any other customer. But when they reached the register, his usual behavior returned in full force. He tossed the money onto the counter and didn't respond when asked if he wanted his food heated. He grabbed his change with that same dismissive attitude. And that's when it happened. Before I could even process what was going on, his girlfriend suddenly snapped. She turned to him with an expression that could have frozen fire and raised her voice so loud the entire store could hear. "Why do you always act like that when you're the one paying? The moment you're in a position of power, you treat people like dirt. But when you're dealing with someone above you, you act like the most obedient little servant. Do you realize how pathetic that is?" The whole store was silent. Even the other customers, who had been minding their own business, slowly turned to watch. For the first time since I'd met him, he didn't have anything to say. He just stood there, eyes wide, his face rapidly turning red. But she wasn't finished. "Do you know what? You're exactly like your father, the one you claim to hate so much. No, you're actually worse, because you've spent your whole life trying to convince yourself that you're different when you're just not. And guess what? I'm sick of this, and I'm leaving you, like your mum left him. I'm done. Don't ever contact me again." At this, his face was burning red. The arrogant, smug expression he always carried was gone. His hands were shaking. And then, in a moment of sheer desperation, he bolted after her. The doors automatically opened as he ran out onto the street, shouting something I couldn't hear. But then, right in full view of the store, he punched her. Without hesitation, I reached for my phone and called the police. They arrived after a little while, took statements. I don't know if they caught up to him or are going to pursue him. Like I said, it only happened tonight. But I hope she stays the hell away from that guy. And I hope he stays the hell away from our store. This is a story my father once told me. My father worked for a large security company until his retirement. When he was just starting out, he often worked night shifts, and one night he was assigned to night patrol of a company building in Kyoto. It was a pretty standard job, standard duty. 2 people were assigned to watch the building at scheduled times. They'd take turns doing rounds. By the time this particular night came around, my father had been working at that building for about a year. He had gotten to know a few of the employees fairly well, enough to chat with them when they crossed paths. So on this night, after most of the employees had left for the day, my father was making his rounds in the dark, empty office. That's when he saw one of the men he often talked to, an easygoing, friendly guy, still sitting at his desk, typing away on his computer. "Huh, still working late, huh?" my father asked. "You're really putting in the hours tonight, huh?" The man glanced up, gave a small nod, and went back to his work. It was a bit odd though. Normally they'd exchange a few words, but tonight the guy was acting somewhat distant. My father figured he was just tired and wanted to get his work done, so he didn't really give it much thought. He returned to his office to wait for the shift change, and then he went home. But something about that incident stayed with him. Later that night, just before it was time for the next security guard to start his shift, my father decided to go back to the office to check on the man. He grabbed a can of coffee and walked back through the dark halls, but when he reached the man's desk, he was gone. The computer was still on though, with the screen glowing in the dim light of the office. It seemed like he'd just left in a hurry, maybe forgetting to turn off the computer. But my father didn't think much of it. He returned to his post, and then, once his shift ended, he went home and tried to forget about it. The next day, my father wasn't working, but he remembered he left something in the security room, so he decided to go back into the office to pick it up. When he arrived, the building felt different. He said it felt like there was an odd energy in the air. Employees were talking in hushed tones, moving around frantically. It felt like something was wrong. Curious, my father asked one of the employees, "What happened? Is everything okay?" "Sudo-san passed away Last night in an accident, they said. He hit my father like a punch to the gut. Sudol-san was the man he'd seen last night, and he was now dead. When did it happen? My father asked. His heart was racing. Well, his wife said that he came home after finishing work and then he went back out at around 1 a.m. because he had more work to do. Apparently he fell asleep at the wheel on his way back to the office, swerved into the oncoming lane and crashed into a guardrail. He died instantly. The words hit my father hard, like a cold slap to the face. He suddenly felt nauseous, like the world around him was spinning. He remembered, just last night he had seen the man, exhausted but hard at work. It didn't make any sense. How could someone be dead and still working late, sitting at their desk unaware? It wasn't until he was heading home that it really hit him, like a brick to the chest. That guy. He couldn't have known he was dead. My father remembered how pale he looked, how he looked almost lifeless, and how drained he seemed. The man's tiredness now felt so much more sinister. It was as though his soul had returned to finish the work he never had the chance to complete. He had been dead for hours, but his spirit still was at the office, unable to let go. My father couldn't shake the image of that man's face. He couldn't stop thinking about how he had tried to finish his tasks, even in death. The thought was chilling, but my father also felt a strange sense of sadness for him. Perhaps he had unfinished business, something he couldn't leave behind, as if he valued his work so much he couldn't leave it, even when life left him. After that night, my father's view of working the night shift changed. He became more anxious, uneasy. A little while later, he was reassigned to the day shift. He said it was a relief. It's been over 40 years since that night, but the memory still haunts him. He often tells my children this story when they ask him about his old job, his voice still trembling a little, as if the fear hasn't quite left him. Strange things happen on night shifts, he always says, and every time, his words send a little chill down my spine. But there's one thing I'd like to know. If he did somehow return to the office, I wonder what he was typing on his work computer. It's a shame nobody thought to check that. Perhaps it would have been a message.
When you work the night shift at a convenience store in a rural area, you learn to live with silence. The hours stretch endlessly, broken only by the occasional late-night customer, the hum of the refrigerators, and the dull flicker of the fluorescent lights overhead. I had gotten used to the monotony, stacking shelves, wiping down counters, waiting for deliveries. But on one particular night, something happened that I will never forget. It started when my store manager let me take an early break. "It's dead quiet tonight," he said, waving me off toward the back room. I settled into the small office, sipping on a canned coffee, when I heard the electric chime of the automatic door. Reflexively, I glanced at the surveillance monitor. The glass doors had slid open. No one was there. I frowned. Probably a moth or a stray cat triggering the sensor. It had happened before, but something about it put me on edge. The door stayed open just a little too long, as if something unseen was hesitating on the threshold. When I returned to the register, my manager looked at me and asked, "You noticed that just now, didn't you?" I nodded. The door opened, but no one came in. His expression darkened. Then, in a lower voice, he said, "Can I tell you something unsettling?" I gestured for him to go on, and so, with a sigh, he began his story. The store's history. My manager wasn't always a convenience store owner. He had taken an early retirement package, using the severance pay to start his own business. At first, things were great. Better than great, actually. The store he opened was in a quiet, rural area near a train station, with a steady flow of customers. Profits were strong. Staffed with part-timers, the place practically ran itself. But then, about 3 months after opening, something strange happened. The night shift workers began quitting. One by one, they left. Some after only a few weeks, others without even giving notice. No one gave a clear reason. They just walked away. At first, my manager shrugged it off as bad luck. But when no one would stay, even with higher wages than competing stores, he grew concerned. To keep the store running, he had no choice but to start working the night shifts himself. And that's when he understood. The first encounter. It began with little things. The door chiming with no one there. Shadows shifting in the corners of his vision. A creeping feeling of being watched when the store was otherwise empty. One night, while stocking shelves, the door opened. "Good evening," he called out automatically. No reply. He turned. The glass doors were fully open, yet no one stood outside. Brushing off his unease, he returned to stocking drinks in the fridge. But then, minutes later, the door opened again. And again, at exactly 2:13 a.m. He started watching the clock after that. It happened every night, always at around the same time. Still, he told himself it was just a malfunction, a sensor issue, nothing to worry about. Until the night he saw the man. The surveillance footage. One night, my manager was taking a break in the back room when the chime rang again. His tired eyes glanced at the monitor. A man had entered the store. Dressed in an old-fashioned jacket, he drifted past the shelves, moving slowly, his head slightly tilted, as if listening to something the manager couldn't hear. My manager straightened up, ready to return to the register. But before he could leave the office, something stopped him cold. The man had no reflection in the glass doors. Heart pounding, he watched the screen as the figure wandered towards the magazine aisle. And then, the man turned his head. Not towards the shelves, not towards the counter. He turned to face the security camera directly. His eyes, empty, dark, bored into the lens. My manager froze. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the man turned and walked straight out through the closed doors. The glass didn't move. There was no distortion, no sign of impact. He just passed through. And the moment he did, the screen flickered violently, static consuming the feed. For a few seconds, distorted images flashed across the monitor. He said he thought he saw a house for a split second. Then the screen went black. A stigmatized property. He couldn't get the events of that night shift off of his mind. So the next morning, my manager confronted his supervisor, demanding to know if anything had happened on the land before the store was built. The supervisor brushed it off. "We don't look into that. It's not good for business." In Japan, there's a term for places like this. Jiko buken. Stigmatized properties. Places where something terrible happened. Death so violent or lonely that the very space itself refuses to forget. When landlords can't fill these properties, they sometimes get repurposed, turned into convenience stores, parking lots, even train stations. Anywhere that people will pass through, but never stay. And our store, it was one of them. The final proof. Not knowing what else to do, my manager secretly placed a small dish of salt in a hidden corner of the store, an old purification practice. That night, a young couple came in to browse magazines. And then, the chime rang. The automatic doors opened. No one entered. The couple stiffened, whispering to each other, uneasy. And then, one by one, items from the shelves began to fall. No one touched them. The couple screamed and bolted for the exit. The next morning, the dish of salt had melted into a murky puddle. The last words. Years later, my manager finally learned the truth. Before the convenience store was built, a large traditional house had stood on that land. A wealthy family had once lived there, and rumor has it that the head of the family took his life. Stricken with grief, the family abandoned the house, leaving it to decay. Eventually, the land was sold, and the store was built. "Maybe," my manager said, his voice quieter now, "he's still looking for his home." After that, he started leaving fresh flowers in the store every week. And slowly, the intervals between incidences grew larger and larger. But the night shift workers never stayed long. And my manager, he refuses to work alone. When he told me all this, I thought, wow, thanks.
It happened about 3 years ago. At the time, I was working as a delivery person for a warehouse company. That night, after finishing work, I went drinking with some of my coworkers. We hopped from bar to bar, and before I knew it, the last train had already left. The next day, I had a load to prepare, and deliveries early in the morning, so I decided to stay the night at the company. There was a break room on the second floor of the office next to the warehouse, and the drivers working early or on late shifts would often take naps there. But there was a rumor that something appeared at night, so hardly anyone stayed there overnight. I had heard the rumor, but I never experienced anything weird in my life, and honestly, I was pretty clueless when it came to the supernatural stuff. Since I was quite drunk at the time, I didn't really think much of it. I just laid down on the tatami mat in the break room and fell asleep almost immediately. How long had I been asleep, I don't know, but I woke up to the sound of a phone ringing. The office phone was ringing. Who could be calling at this time of night? I thought about it for a moment, but feeling too lazy to get up, I decided to ignore it. But the phone kept ringing, more insistently. It was ridiculously loud since the volume was cranked all the way up. Fed up, I was about to get up when suddenly someone started banging on the door of the office downstairs. Suspicious, I froze and listened carefully. Now I could hear the sound of someone scraping the door. A chill ran down my spine, and I held my breath, still half lying, half sitting up on the tatami. The phone's ringing suddenly stopped. At the same time, the sound from the door also ceased. Then I could hear quiet voices. It sounded like someone was talking outside the door, but I couldn't quite make out the words. I had no idea what was happening, but the uneasy feeling in my gut told me to stay completely still, not making a sound. I focused all my attention on my ears, trying not to make a move. The voices came in low, intermittent murmurs. It seemed like there were several male voices. Then suddenly, a woman's voice joined in. As soon as it did, the talking stopped, and the whole area fell silent again. I still didn't understand what was going on, but I kept waiting, listening, in silence. Eventually I relaxed a little, and before I knew it, I had fallen back asleep. The next morning I woke up early, and I entered the warehouse through the back door to start loading by myself. Then I saw a group of people gathered near the office entrance. Stopping my work, I walked over to see what was going on, and I noticed that the door had scratch marks on it, just like the noise I had heard yesterday. Maybe it was a burglary attempt, I suggested. The department head, after hearing my story, decided to contact the police. Later that evening, after finishing my deliveries and returning to the office, the department head looked at me and said, "Go to the police. They caught some burglars nearby today. They want to hear about what happened last night." So I ended up going to the police station in the department head's car. At the police station, I gave a very simple statement, and I learned more about the burglars that they had caught. According to the police, the criminals were part of a Chinese theft gang. They would call up warehouse companies to confirm if anyone was there, and if the phone kept ringing, they would assume no one was. So they'd break in, using tools, stealing goods, and running off. They even had guns in case of emergencies, one of the officers said. When I heard that, I shuddered, imagining what might have happened to me if I had been caught by those thieves that night. Then the officer asked me something that piqued my curiosity. "You said you didn't answer the phone last night. Is that true?" I confirmed with a yes, and the officer paused for a moment, clearly thinking, before he began to speak again. "That's funny, the thieves said that they called your company, and someone picked up the phone. That's when they stopped trying to break in, and instead waited outside." I was stunned. "At that time, no one is talking about what happened there," the officer continued, looking slightly troubled. "When they were caught, they were shaking in their car near your company. 4 grown men, trembling like children. It was really strange." "4 men, you say?" I replied. "Yeah, they were all caught at once. Thankfully. We were all relieved about that part," the officer said with a slight sigh. That's when it hit me. I remembered what happened last night. After the phone call ended, the men with weapons and tools had been stood outside the door, and then right before the voices abruptly stopped, I heard that woman's voice. And for the life of me, I have no idea whose voice it was. Maybe the rumors about the warehouse after dark had some truth to them. It happened during a time in my life when I'd just quit my corporate job and I was bouncing between interviews, trying to figure out what came next. To keep myself afloat, I picked up a late-night job at a beef bowl chain restaurant. One of those 24-hour spots where the lights were always on but no one ever really looks awake. This was about a year and a half ago. The location I worked at wasn't exactly popular. Most nights it was quiet enough that from 10 p.m. to 9 a.m. I ran the entire store, completely alone, just me, all night. I got used to the silence, the hum of the fridge, the occasional soft passing of traffic outside, but that night was different. It was raining, not just a drizzle, but a full downpour, torrential rain. Before I set off for work, I knew it would be a real quiet one. The streets outside were empty. No headlights, no footsteps, just the sound of relentless rain hammering against the windows and pooling along the curb. It was actually quite relaxing to watch the rain in all directions cascade down the windows. Around 1 a.m., I received a delivery, restocking ingredients. I moved them into the walk-in fridge, cleaned the kitchen, checked the clock. 3 a.m. There wasn't a single customer in the past 2 hours. But that wasn't that unusual. Even on dry nights, there were stretches of time when no one came in. I leaned against the counter and let out a quiet sigh of relief. Honestly, I was grateful for the calm. Then the chime sounded. The automated door sensor had triggered. Someone had entered. I straightened up and moved to the counter, already expecting a soaking salaryman or a restless student in a hoodie. But what I saw made me stop cold. There, seated at the counter, was a woman. An elderly woman, maybe in her 70s. Her clothes were completely soaked, clinging to her frail frame. Her hair hung in wet clumps. She looked like she'd walked straight through the storm. But the part that made my stomach twist, she had no umbrella. She was barefoot, her pale feet glistening with rainwater on the clean tile floor I had just mopped. Trying to keep my voice steady, I greeted her. "Welcome," I said, placing a glass of water in front of her. She didn't respond. Instead, she slowly stood up and shuffled away from the counter towards the takeout section. Silently. No sound but the squeak of her soaked clothes and her bare feet on tile. Something about the way she moved made my skin crawl, but I followed. It was my job after all. I moved behind the takeout register, offering a second polite greeting. "Welcome. What can I get you?" She looked at me. Her eyes were unfocused but heavy, and then she asked, "Why haven't you gone to war?" My brain stalled. "Huh?" She continued in a low but certain voice. "You're so young. You should be at the front. It's a war out there, isn't it?" I had no idea how to respond. She kept talking about bombs, about soldiers, about the front lines. Her words were disjointed, out of place, as if she was somewhere else entirely. No matter what I said, no matter how hard I tried to steer the conversation back to the menu, she wouldn't stop talking about the war. I began to worry. Was she confused? Maybe suffering from dementia? So after a few more attempts, I picked up the store phone and quietly called the police. She kept rambling while we waited, sitting by the window now, staring out at the sheets of rain, talking to no one in particular. About 10 minutes later, 2 officers arrived in a patrol car. Another came shortly on a bike. They approached the woman gently, asked for her name, her address, but she wouldn't give one. She wouldn't respond directly. Just talk of more war, more confusion. Eventually one of the officers spoke in a low, almost tired tone. "Ma'am, this is a restaurant. You can't stay here unless you order something." Then gently, but firmly, they escorted her to the patrol car. The officer on the bike nodded at me as he left. And just like that, she was gone. 15 minutes later, I walked out from the kitchen to replace the soy sauce bottles at the counter. As I turned towards the entrance, there was someone standing outside, facing away from the store, staring out into the road. Through the rain-streaked glass, I saw bare feet sopping cloves. And even though I couldn't see her face, I knew it was her. She was standing there, silently, no umbrella, no shoes, just letting the rain fall over her, as if she hadn't been taken away, as if she hadn't ever left. A cold wave of anger and fear washed over me. Had the officers just left her there? Was she really wandering alone in this downpour? I picked up the phone and called the police station. "Yeah, hi, you just visited the restaurant earlier. I hate to say it again, but that woman's back, the one you escorted out of our premises. She's outside again." The dispatcher calmly responded. "Understood. We'll send someone out to you in about 10 minutes. 5 minutes passed. Then the store phone rang again. It was one of the officers from earlier. He said, "Yeah, hi, this is the officer who came by before. You know about that woman? She's still with us. She's in the patrol car. We haven't been able to get a name yet to identify her." My voice caught in my throat. "Uh-huh?" My tone had jumped into a higher pitch without me realizing. I was barely holding it together. "No, that's not possible," I said. Well, I just saw her. She stood outside. I'm looking at her right." But even as I said it, I turned, and she was gone. The sidewalk outside was completely empty. The only sound was the torrential rain bouncing off of the pavement in endless static. I opened the door, stepped into the storm, and looked around. No pedestrians, no figures, no footprints. Not even a stray umbrella caught in the wind. I stood there, heart pounding, drenched in rain. Then I returned to the phone, picked up the receiver again and whispered, "I'm sorry. I guess I must have imagined it." The officer gave a small sympathetic chuckle. "Yeah, it was strange. It's been a strange night, You probably got spooked and were maybe imagining things." He hung up. After that, I couldn't sit still. I started cleaning the store obsessively, anything to stay busy, to keep moving, to not look at the windows. And during that stretch of time from nearly 1 a.m. to 4 a.m., not a single customer came in. Even in typhoons, we usually had at least one or two. But that night, it was just me, and the storm, and the torrential rain, and whatever she was.